Good Tuesday morning, guys. My name is Jerry Miller, and welcome to the Jerry and Jerry Show. Thank you kindly for joining us. We're live in downtown Charlottesville, about a mile from Scott Stadium and about a mile from the John Paul Jones Arena. It's kind of that crossover hybrid portion of the calendar year where football still has 3 games remaining, including a Thursday night contest against Louisville. Right now, the Cardinals, a pretty heavy point favorite with a home contest on Thursday night on national TV. Louisville, a 20-point favorite, the over-under at 50 and change. But the good news is we have basketball to talk about, and that is good news after a loss to the Ramblin Rack that may have been the most difficult loss for Virginia football this season. And I say that because it seemed like the tide was turning for Virginia football. They were favored against the Yellow Jackets. We'll cover all those stories and more. Take a look at headlines on the Jerry and Jerry Show as Judah Wickower, our director, goes to the studio camera and the two-shot and welcomes the Virginia Sports Hall of Famer Jerry Hootie Ratcliffe to the program. My friend, 3 games left on the docket for football. Louisville, a 20-point favorite, a 50.5 over-under national televised football game. This contest. First, we got to dot the I's and cross the T's against Georgia Tech. You know, this game started with promise, and it started with promise in the beginning of the week as UVA was favored. Started with promise. Virginia looked good early in the first quarter, but it didn't finish well. Where do you want to begin, my friend?
Yeah, well, you know, Virginia beat Georgia Tech on the road last year, and same setup. They do have a more dynamic guy at quarterback who's developed. He transferred in Haynes King. I think he's doing for Georgia Tech right now what Riley Leonard was doing for Duke earlier last year and so earlier this year before he got hurt. But he's a guy who can make a difference. He's fast for a big quarterback and has good running instinct and engineered a really good offensive plan. I mean, Georgia Tech piled up 514 yards of offense on Virginia, and 305 of that essentially was on the ground. You can't do that and play competitive football. I don't care who you're playing. And Virginia didn't tackle well. They took a big – I thought the entire football team took a giant step backward.
Me too.
They tackled poorly, and against a team that runs the ball like Georgia Tech does, you just can't do that.
You're
they
get
gave
picked
up
apart.
So many explosive plays that you're not giving yourself a chance to win. And the fact that Tony Muskett got injured on the first series of the game, it's day-to-day this week for Louisville, threw things back in the hands of the freshman Anthony Colandrea, and as spectacular as he is at times, he's still a freshman, and he makes some very questionable decisions. He sometimes lacks poise under pressure and makes big mistakes. That's something that they eliminated mostly with Muskett in there, who's maybe not quite as thrilling to watch, but is a gritty, solid guy that pretty much doesn't beat himself for the most part and doesn't make a lot of mistakes that's going to shoot you in the foot. So he suffered a high ankle sprain, and that's not always easy to come back from. So I expect, we don't know for sure because yesterday all they told us is that Muskett's day-to-day, but I would expect Colandrea will probably be starting out at Louisville.
I would expect the same, right?
On Thursday night, yeah.
I mean, and it,
short turnaround.
That's right. That's what I was going to ask you about. Judah Wickower, you get those headlines on screen with one shots if you could. The Colandrea question's all over the feed right now. Burning Colandrea's redshirt, was it the right move? Oh, you're the expert. You're the Virginia Sports Hall of Famer. I'll offer my 2 cents, pass you the baton. When the decision was made to play Colandrea, the contest, the outcome of the Georgia Tech game, it was still a football game.
Right.
And the coaches, you were there. I'm watching on television. You see Elliott go to the orthopedic tent multiple times to check with the doctors on the likelihood of Muskett returning. So the man has to make a game time, in the moment decision. And I would imagine some of his thinking is like, the other option's a walk-on. Colandrea has upside. I'm maybe coaching for my job. And if we win 4 straight games, we could become bowl eligible. The team would be the toast of the town. And Colandrea gives us the most opportunity to win. I got to burn the red shirt and play Colandrea.
Yeah, I think it was almost a predetermined decision that they made weeks ago. And it's tough to make that kind of decision in the heat of the moment. So I think this was already decided that, and he has said that, we're going to go with Muskett and we want to redshirt Colandrea if possible, knowing that he's the only backup that he has who he trusts to be able to run that offense. And, I mean, the other guy, Grady Brosterhouse, is a walk-on who's had scholarship offers at probably lower-level football programs, but decided to come here. And he's picked up a little bit of experience and probably will get a lot of reps this week in case Colandrea gets hurt. But, the plan all along was, and Tony Elliott talked to Colandrea and his family about it, and they were okay with it, was, we're going to redshirt you. You've played in 4 games. If you play in another, your red shirt is gone. And we'd like to save you for the future. But if Muskett goes down again, and there was a likelihood of that because he was playing on a bum shoulder already. This is going to require surgery. I would give the kid a lot of credit for having the guts to go out there and be tough and not complain and throw it all on the line. But if he went down, it was automatic. There was no – they had painted themselves into a corner. We talked about that in the preseason when they didn't add yet another scholarship quarterback to the program through the portal. So they were painted into a corner, and they had no choice but to burn his red shirt and put him in the game because, I mean, what are you going to do, go with a walk-on quarterback? That's not – I mean, you talk about wanting to get fired.
It was a lose-lose scenario.
That was a lose-lose scenario, and Colandrea played as hard as he could, but again, he's a freshman. He makes mistakes, and that's just part of the maturation of a young quarterback that they're going to have to live with as long as he's out there this season.
Here's the question. This is a follow-up from me, and then we'll get to the viewers and listeners. We'll highlight some of the viewers and listeners watching this program right now. And viewers and listeners, we encourage you to chime in with questions. Vanessa Parkhill, hello. Kyle Irvin, hello. Angie Fink, Ray Cadell, hello. Jamie Turner, Nelson Lanza, hello. Lisa Costello, Scott Thorpe, hello. Harold Hertz, hello. Viewers and listeners in Richmond, Lynchburg, Williamsburg, Virginia Beach, Norfolk, McLean, Arlington, Danville, Martinsville, Bluefield, watching the program, the Outer Banks, Boone, North Carolina, watching the program. Question for me first. You burned Colandrea's red shirt and a loss to Georgia Tech. Are you now committed to playing Colandrea the rest of the year?
That's a good question, and I don't know. A lot of people would like to see that because they believe he is the future, but you got to remember that Muskett is returning for another year as well. At least it would seem so. I guess he could always leave if he wanted to. I don't know, but it's a delicate situation that they have over there. I mean, if you play Colandrea the rest of the year, does Muskett leave? If you bring Muskett back after, assuming he can recuperate from this high ankle sprain anytime before the season's over, do you bring him back? And if you do, does that – apparently that's not going to impact Colandrea's decision to stay and not enter the transfer portal. He loves it here. He and Muskett are very close. A lot of people think quarterbacks might be rivals, but these guys help each other. They hang out together. They're good friends. They root for each other. I don't think there's any jealousy there or any envy, so I don't think it would impact Colandrea. But high ankle sprains
they linger.
They can linger for weeks, and so if they're looking to try to keep Muskett healthy, and he's a quarterback who likes to run when he gets the opportunity with quarterback draws, and he's chased out of the pocket quite often, or they have to move the pocket. So he has to be mobile, and if that high ankle sprain is giving him problems, it might be smarter just to sit him the rest of the season.
Jerry Hootie, Ratcliffe guys, the star of the program, the Virginia Sports Hall of Famer. We have Chad Wood chiming in. Chad Wood is a diehard UVA sports fan. Vanessa Parkhill in Earlysville, good morning to you as well. He says Colandrea will be fine. He just needs to take what's given and stop trying to do too much. He's trying to force the issue. Your thoughts on that?
Well, that's true, but it's easier said than done. When you're
18.
When you're 18, you're 5'11", and you've got 300-pound guys wanting to put you on your back. And sometimes the blocking is not that great. You can be forced into some decisions and lose your poise in a hurry, because if you don't get out of the way, those guys are going to they could possibly break your shoulder or break your leg or something. So it's a very physical game, and the speed of the game is so much faster when you're coming out of high school into college, and it takes a while for that to slow down, especially for a quarterback, because he has to process so much so quickly. I mean, if he's going to throw the ball, he's probably going to have to do it in 2.8 seconds. You have to get your pre-snap read and see where the safeties are. You got to determine how many people are in the tackle box. Do you need to change from a running play to a pass play? Or if it's an RPO, you got to look at where people are lined up. You got to consider the pass rush. Are they blitzing? Are they staying? That's a lot to put on an 18-year-old. He might be 19 by now, but that's a lot to put on a young guy in a heated situation, and particularly, like I said, other teams are going to go out of their way trying to rattle him to begin with. They might not put as much pressure on a guy like Muskett, who's been around and seen all the blitzes, and the game has slowed down for him. I'm sure that Colandrea's mind is going racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour before every snap, and he's got to make a lot of instant decisions, and it's not easy. It's not easy.
Well said. Logan Wells-Claylow, welcome to the program. Bill McChesney, thank you kindly for joining us. Let's welcome folks in Allentown. We have a regular group of Allentown watchers and listeners of our talk show, and we love Pennsylvania on the Jerry and Jerry show. I'm going to throw this to you. You've already touched on this. If Colandrea goes down the stretch, I'll take a step back. We've been talking on the Jerry and Jerry show about keeping Colandrea the quarterback of the future. We've pontificated about the transfer portal and how folks would be interested in Colandrea, who clearly has upside. One of the things perhaps media, perhaps this show has not covered, is Muskett, the guy who could end up transferring, with 1 year of eligibility and playing time still left, a guy who's got a pretty good sample size in 2023 of performance. If you look at the highlight reels and when he's been healthy, hell, he's been playing the year not healthy, and he's still had a lot of great highlights.
Yeah.
Is this the guy that could transfer?
I guess he could. I don't know all of his specifics in terms of where he stands in terms of all that the academic part of it, but I would think that he probably could. He certainly has proven he can play on this level and has played with a lot of inspiration and gained the admiration of his and respect of his teammates. I think they'd run through a wall for that guy. Just seeing what he puts on the line every week, playing with an injured shoulder and still sacrificing his body every time he takes off to run the ball. And That's how he got hurt the other day. We thought he got hurt on the sack, but he actually got hurt a couple plays before that on a busted running play, and he tried to make something out of it and got hurt. But yeah, I would think it's probably a possibility he could go somewhere. I don't. Nobody has ever brought that up to him, I don't think, so we don't know how he feels about it. But I would say right now, as long as things go the way they appear they're going, I would say that both those quarterbacks will probably be back next year.
Well, if they're both back next year, that would be fantastic for Virginia football, the Tony Elliott coaching staff. After the loss to Georgia Tech in the presser, which you were at in person, I listened to it on the radio. Elliott and his two coordinators fell on the proverbial sword for this loss. First time this season I've heard them fall on the sword to this extent. What'd you make of that?
I think some of it was to take some of the pressure or maybe the heat off of the players. That's something a lot of coaches do. But it was good to see them take some accountability for it too, because Virginia just wasn't ready to play. And that falls on the coaches. And I know that it wasn't for a lack of effort, because Tony Elliott said last week that one of the first things he did Monday morning when they came in was talk to them about securing their first ACC home win at Scott Stadium. I mean, Scott Stadium used to be a tough place to play, man. I don't care who you were. If you came into Scott Stadium, it was going to be tough for you to come in and walk out with a win for any visiting team. I don't care how good they were. We've seen a lot of upsets there over the years, but they haven't won a home ACC game since Tony's been here. They didn't do that great. For a while there, they had a great record under Bronco at home, and then it kind of fell off his last year. But so it wasn't like that they were unaware of what was at stake. They also knew that if they won out, they would definitely be in a bowl game. There was even a possibility if they just won 3 more games, they could possibly go to a bowl game, because there's probably not going to be enough eligible teams to fill all the bowl slots. So they all knew what was on the line, and they just got their butts kicked on both sides of the football and just did not play well. And it was clear that Georgia Tech was the team that wanted it the most and took it to Virginia, and Virginia didn't have many answers. Georgia Tech made some great adjustments early on and continued to adjust, and Virginia didn't do well adjusting back to those adjustments.
Jerry Ratcliffe dropping dimes here. Questions are coming in. Let's go to Leslie, who's watching the program in Richmond. She says, you guys talked last week on the show how Tony Elliott had started to turn the season around, and how Virginia, if they won out, could make a bowl game, and he could be on the short list for Coach of the Year with finishing with 6 victories. Now I watched the game. My husband and I traveled to this game like we do for all home contests. Morale was low. The stadium was empty, especially in the second half. And I would say that was the worst loss we have had this year, and maybe in the Tony Elliott era. Does this put him back on a hot seat?
It's definitely the worst loss this season, no question about it. They just did not play well. They didn't tackle well. They didn't do much of anything well. And they turned the ball over too many times and just let Georgia Tech have their way. Hot seat, that's a difficult question, because we've addressed that throughout the season. I really don't think that Virginia is going to fire Tony Elliott unless something bizarre happens. I mean, if they lose out and get blown out every game and he loses the team and fans stop coming and donors start griping, who knows? There could be several heads rolling, but I would say if things play out the way they could, I don't think there's going to be any changes made with him or his staff, unless an AD or somebody would force him to do that. We've seen that happen here before in the past. I mean, they have a good chance to beat Duke here. They have a decent chance to beat Virginia Tech here if they play up to their capabilities. We saw how well they can play against
Miami and UNC.
Oh, no question. I mean, they could have easily won that Miami game. And they've been close in some other contests. So, it's fathomable that they could win those last two games. I don't give them much chance at Louisville on Thursday night for multiple reasons. One, Louisville's undefeated at home.
Louisville has a lot to play for.
They're 8-1. They are probably in the catbird seat to play Florida State in the ACC championship game.
It's nationally televised.
Could get a nice bowl game out of it. In fact, if they win out, if they beat Virginia and Miami on the road, and then beat Kentucky and beat Florida State in the ACC championship game, they could be in the college football playoff.
Right.
So they've got a lot to play for, and that's one of the great stories in college football this year is what Jeff Brom has done with that program. Remember last year, Jerry, when they came hobbling in to Scott Stadium?
Oh yeah.
With Scott Satterfield, their former coach. There were stories that had they lost that game here last year, that he was going to get fired
after the game
before he got on the plane to come back to Louisville.
Right.
Instead, they played a great game. They won the game. They finished the season strong. Went to a bowl game. He got out of there, and they wisely hired Jeff Brom, an alum who has a lot of pride in that program, and he's got things jumping out there in Louisville. I'm sure their fans are ecstatic. They have a great fan base out there, and like I said, they're 5-0 at home, and just playing really well.
Chad asked this question. I'm seeing this question from Spencer, and I'm seeing this question from Tommy. Tommy's watching this program in my stomping grounds, former stomping grounds, Williamsburg. They all ask about big donors and the influence that they could have on this process. Specifically, and we may not have the insight to this. This is off the X's and O's. This is more the politics of big football. Have the big donations started to slow down?
We don't know that, and Virginia's not about to tell anybody that. You'd have to do some real digging behind the scenes, and I'm sure we'll probably do some of that, but there's no way to find that out unless you talk to some of the right people in the right places, and those conversations haven't happened yet. But I know there were some rumors that popped up a few weeks ago that some big donors had gotten together and offered up the buyout. But I don't believe those. I don't think there was any truth to those.
Right.
rumors.
It was a Twitter rumor originated by someone with not much Virginia beat writing pedigree.
Exactly. And, you hear stuff like that, and not just Virginia's program, but all over the country. You hear all kinds of crazy stuff. We saw some of the worst of it during realignment over the years, and all kinds of stuff where, TV station in D.C. and other people who claimed to be insiders and had inside sources and said that Virginia was talking about going to the Big Ten and all this stuff. And at that point, Virginia never talked to anybody in the Big Ten about anything like that. So you have to take some of these, and I'm not saying that sources, you shouldn't pay attention when legitimate people refer to sources, because a lot of people who know what you want to know you can't burn those sources. You can't reveal them, or you'll never have them in your corner again. But a lot of these unnamed sources you see from people are various outlets that don't have any real credibility. You have to take those with a grain of salt, because sometimes it's just somebody trying to make a splash or make a name for themselves.
Viewers and listeners, ask questions. We'll repeat them live on air, or ask them live on air To the Virginia Sports Hall of Famer, Jerry Hootie Ratcliffe. They're coming in fast and furious. Skip Hudgins. Coach Hudgins, welcome to the program. The legendary baseball coach from Western Albemarle High School watching the show. James Watson, hello and welcome to the program. This is from Roderick Mullins. He says, is the ACC membership completely settled, or will we see any move by members, including Virginia, from the conference?
Well, there's a possibility. There's always a possibility if somebody can find a way out of the contract that's locked in and supposedly unbreakable until 2036. So far, I haven't seen anybody that's found any loopholes in it that's going to create movement. But Florida State keeps threatening that they're going to leave.
Which makes no sense to me.
I agree, and I don't think Dabo Swinney wants to leave and go into the SEC. I mean, they're having troubles. They're struggling in the ACC, for goodness sake. So why would they want to step into a higher level of competition where you're just another average football program?
Bingo.
But I think that where there's smoke, sometimes there's fire, and you can't discount the fact that that's the main reason that Virginia or the ACC added Stanford, Cal, and SMU. It wasn't because they found those schools real attractive and we're going to add a lot to ACC football or even basketball for that matter. The ACC was a proactive defensive move in case the ACC does lose 3 teams. If they go below 14 teams, I believe it is, then that contract with ESPN goes kaput. So by adding 3 teams, they've took one move into securing their future and stabilization and keeping the conference together no matter if someone loses or not. Frankly, if North Carolina or Florida State or Clemson wants to leave, I don't know that you can really stop them. It may cost them some money in the long run, but I just don't see why you would want to leave because you're losing your natural rivalries. Ask Maryland how that went.
Right. Most specifically,
and you're stepping into a higher competition.
There it is.
What good does that do you?
Look at what Florida State's got right now. Florida State's the clear-cut most talented team in the conference. If the cookie crumbles the right way, Florida State's playing for a national championship.
Yeah, and if Florida State is in the SEC this year, they're not.
They're middle of the road.
Yeah.
Maybe, right. Then Dabo Swinney, some folks in Death Valley, and you and I never speak for you. I feel on this one, we've already talked about it. Dabo Swinney, they should be building statues and calling street names after Coach Swinney, but half a portion of the fan base wants him out. Imagine what happens if he goes to the SEC.
That's fan bases. 2 things that I used to say, they're probably not as relevant now because both of these men have sadly passed away, but all you have to know about fan bases is that they once burned Dean Smith, hanged him in effigy, and the same thing at West Virginia with Bobby Bowden. So those 2 went on to become 2 of the greatest coaches in their sport in collegiate history. So there's always going to be a certain portion that's going to be disgruntled, and I think most coaches try not to pay too much attention to those. I think Dabo, I kind of admired that he put that caller, the guy from Spartanburg, Tyler from Spartanburg, in his place on his radio show. Some people said, well, you shouldn't have done that. You just opened a new can of worms. But I kind of admire the fact that he wasn't going to let some 17-year-old snot-nosed kid try to tarnish what he's accomplished at Clemson. He's won 2 national championships. He's won 10 or 11 or 12 games every year for over a decade. And you got some punk trying to diminish what you've accomplished. I kind of admire what he did.
Oh, that's so funny. Edward Jenkins watching in Texas on Jerry Hootie Ratcliffe's Twitter account right now. Viewers and listeners, let us know your thoughts. We'll relay them live on air. The question, my phone's blowing up right now with viewers and listeners asking questions. We need to put this to bed here. The questions are around the job security here. I think you and I both believe Elliott, and I don't want to speak for you, I'll just put my 2 cents out there and pass it to you. Elliott's back next year, guys. I think both coordinators are back next year. I think he got a lot of goodwill with how he handled the tragedy last year. I think that victory against North Carolina got him a lot of equity, a lot of savings in the bank. Is the seat warm? Yes. Could the seat get warmer if he finishes with 3 more losses to close the year, especially one to Virginia Tech? Absolutely. 2 years is not enough sample size to pink slip anyone. My 2 cents.
Yeah, it's rare. It's only happened once here ever, and again, there were extenuating circumstances to that. But I just don't see it. I don't think Tony's going to lose this team. That's usually a quality, and ADs and other people are watching for things like that. Do you lose your team? Do they not listen to you anymore? Are you becoming negative, or are you not giving it all you've got? None of those things are going to happen with Tony Elliott. His players respect him too much. He's a very driven guy. He's carried quite a burden ever since last November, and the 1-year anniversary of that is coming up next week, which is going to conjure up all those emotions for the community and himself and all the program. I agree. I don't think he's going anywhere. I don't think there's going to be any staff changes unless some of those guys decide to leave on their own. I just don't see it happening. I think he did get some bank in beating North Carolina and could have beaten Miami on the road. I think that shows some progress in the program and hope for the future, because you see that there are possibilities there. What they need to be able to do, and they may have to go to the transfer portal to do it.
They have to, because their recruiting class is dead last right now in the conference.
Yeah, and I don't know where they stand with some of the high school recruits that they're trying to lure here. But I asked Tony about this yesterday at the press conference. Playable depth on this team is not very good, and he admitted that's one of the things that they really have to work on to rebuild this football program. I mean, he came into a rebuilding situation. They had some really good players that didn't fit his system, and that was unfortunate. But a lot of players who had committed right before he got here decommitted. Some of the guys who were in the program who could have made a difference left, and some of them even left after last season, as we saw. But depth is a big deal. I remember a friend of mine was a defensive coordinator at another ACC school, and I talked to him about Virginia, and this was during the Bronco era, and he said, Virginia's got some nice players. They've got some guys who can play for just about anybody, and they still do. We've seen some of the guys that transferred out last year are playing at big programs all over the country, and the year before as well. He said they just don't have enough of them, and that's what it takes in football. You've got to have depth, and even Tony said that, I've noticed the last several weeks when we line up against people, especially opposing defensive fronts, that they bring that first unit out or a couple of players out, and they replace them with juniors or seniors there's not much fall off. Virginia can't do that. A lot of times when Virginia takes a guy out or has a guy injured, they have to go with a freshman or a sophomore who's probably doing on-the-job training.
Well, look at the quarterback position.
Yeah, quarterback's another spot. So that's something that he has to address. And, again, I think he's probably going to have to do it through the transfer portal. And, again, that brings up all kinds of other issues because of NIL and transfer credit's not transferring to Virginia. I think somebody told me last night. I don't know that this is true, but I think if you're an upperclassman and wanting to transfer to Virginia, you have to have so many hours or something at Virginia, or they won't even look at you. This sounded complicated to me. I don't know the rules, but it's not easy just to go out and take 25 new players from the transfer portal like some schools are doing.
Questions coming in faster than I can keep up. You have a question coming in here from South Carolina, and this is in response to a two-part question. The first part says, Tyler in Spartansburg is a laughing stock. Us true Tiger fans realize what Coach Sweeney has done for the program, and he ain't going anywhere anytime soon. Second part of the question is, I'm an 87 Virginia football graduate, and I think this program is at as low a point as I've seen so far. We go up to Scott Stadium for a home football game once, maybe twice a year, and I've completely forgotten about football now and turned my attention to basketball. Please ask Ratcliffe where he thinks low points this program is with his history and in years past.
I think it would be similar to the end of the Mike London era, probably when most fans had given up hope that things were going to turn around, and it looked bleak. The recruiting had fallen off to some degree, and the crowds had diminished. There was a lot of apathy surrounding the program, and I think we're seeing some of that now. It could get better or it could get worse, depending on how things break the last month
3
of
games.
the season.
Yeah.
But
then he follows by saying this: no home football wins says something about the atmosphere and environment in Scott Stadium. 100%.
That's true, no question about it. And the atmosphere at Scott Stadium hasn't been great for a while now. Even when Bronco had things going well and they brought Notre Dame, a top 10 team, in here, and the stadium didn't sell out. I mean, that speaks volumes. Because I thought, had Brendan Armstrong been healthy, I thought they would have had a chance to win that game. But unfortunately, he had his ribs broken 2 weeks before at Brigham Young. But, yeah, no home ACC wins is tough to live with. And it does impact your crowds. And when you're bringing in recruits and you're trying to impress them and convince them they should come here, and they come in and they see half the stadium full and then half of those leave at halftime, that doesn't speak well to a 18-year-old who is very impressionable, especially when he goes somewhere the next weekend and the place is full and the joints jumping. And
I mean, even compare and contrast to Virginia Tech.
Yeah.
The Hokies have had significant difficulty over the last handful of years, coinciding with Virginia football's difficulty the last few years. But Lane's packed.
Yes, it is, and it's an exciting environment. You can't deny that. I think some of that is culture. Some of it is just enthusiasm and loyalty, and a lot of Virginia fans will say, well, we don't have anything to get excited about. And you can see that side of the coin as well. So I don't know what the answer is. I mean, say they go 0-3 the rest of the season. You fire Tony Elliott and his staff. Who are you going to bring in?
Exactly.
I mean, they're facing the same set of problems that Tony Elliott has. You may have to settle someone that doesn't even have the coaching background that he has. And I'm not saying that – I'm not trying to compare him with a proven Division I FBS head football coach who's got a lot of history behind him in terms of wins. But this is his first job. He's learning as he goes, and he's in a very difficult place to win. Now, if you look at Virginia's football history, the last 25 years has been fairly bleak. I mean, there were some moments early in the Al Groh era And I think had Virginia delivered to him what they promised him when he came here, I think the program would be advanced. But they didn't give him those things. They have since given some of the other successors some of those things, like an indoor facility, a new football home, which they're building, various things. But this is a very difficult place to win. I mean, going back to George Welsh's press conference in 1980, December 1981, somebody said, "George, why would you come to a coach's graveyard?" And George said, "Well, if it is, it's a lovely graveyard." And he's one of the few people that's been able to have success here. I mean, the 30 years before him, they had 2 winning seasons. In the years after him, Al Groh had a few winning seasons. Mike London had 1 or 2. Bronco finally got 2 or 3 strung together. It's a difficult place to win, and for a lot of reasons. And, but you know, I can see where the fans are upset. But the reality is, you know, I don't know if it's ever going to change unless Virginia changes some of its philosophy on how it handles the football program.
Academics.
And I don't know if that's ever going to happen.
I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think that's going to happen. Comments are coming in quickly. This one we have to, maybe you make a note on this. It doesn't pertain to the discussion, but it's a good comment that's been put in the feed by Laura, who's watching in Roanoke. She says you mentioned Dean Smith being hung in effigy and Bobby Bowden being hung in effigy, and both coaches now passed away. She says rest in power to both of them. Maybe some words on Bobby Knight, who also had a love-hate relationship with his fan base, who recently passed away. So she's asking for some words from you on Bobby Knight, the basketball coach.
Bobby Knight was one of the greatest coaches that ever breathed. A lot of the things that he created, some of the motion and flowing offenses that most of the schools run today, it was a product of his mind, and he was a great teacher of the game. And yeah, he was volatile, and he wanted to do things his own way, and he could be a nasty person to deal with. Spending some time with Fletcher Arrett, who also
love Coach Arrett.
R.I.P. to him. Right. I love that guy.
Me too.
The head coach at Fork Union, who should be in the Hall of Fame.
Amen. He and I spent like 160 Saturdays together doing In the Paint, the radio show he did, which I co-hosted with him. He taught me so much about, I sincerely mean this, like you, Coach Arrett and Coach Schumann have taught me so much about life, spending time across from them like I'm doing here. Yeah. I mean, he was an awesome guy to say the least, and I apologize for interrupting you.
No problem. Anytime you say something great about Fletcher Arrett is fine with me. He once told me, he said, I wanted to learn some things from Bobby Knight, and he graciously accepted my request to spend some time with him. He offered him, I think he stayed at Knight's home for several days, and said it was an incredible experience. He learned a lot, and Bobby Knight wanted to learn from him as well. But he said, I think, and his philosophy was, I think Bobby Knight has this gruff persona because he doesn't want to be bothered, and he figures if he gives that off, that people will leave him alone. And I think that might be a good theory on part of why Knight was the way he was. He was volatile. He'd lose your temper, but he came up in an era as well, and I'm not using this as an excuse because John Wooden never laid hands on a player or never even cursed. I think my goodness was, if he said my goodness, you better watch out, because that was about as dirty as it got with John Wooden, who also had the opportunity to hang out with. But Bobby Knight came up in an era where it wasn't unusual for coaches to lay into their players, put hands on. You can't do stuff like that now. And I think he bridged those generations and where it became frowned upon. But he was sort of a product of his environment. But a brilliant coach. They said if you got to know him very well, you couldn't ask for a better friend. I think Dick Vitale probably could attest to that, because I know they had words at one point and end up being best buddies. But, he was a unique individual. I was around him a few times over the years, not intimately, but around him. And for the most part, he was fairly well behaved and respectful, particularly toward Virginia's basketball teams. Saw him get a little wacky one time in a post-game press conference, but that was Bobby Knight. You got what you paid for. You saw him. You saw Bobby Knight. Bobby Knight is who he was.
Hell of a coaching tree for Bobby Knight.
Absolutely.
It starts with Mike Krzyzewski.
Krzyzewski will be the first to tell you that Bobby Knight changed his life, plucking him from the suburbs of Chicago to come to West Point. And I think he learned an awfully lot from Knight, not just on basketball, but on how to handle all sorts of things. And Krzyzewski could have a little fire in him at times as well. I mean, I'll never forget the night that Virginia upset them here, and they bust home to Durham, and the players thought they were going to go home and get in bed. I'm sure they didn't get back till 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, having made that trip myself many, many times. But instead, he made them get off the bus and practice in Cameron for a while to take his frustration out on how poorly they performed at Virginia. I think the NCAA may have outlawed that by now, but he left quite an impression on Coach K.
Fantastic commentary right there from the Virginia Sports Hall of Famer. Let's go to your Twitter account, Edward Jenkins, watching in Texas, like I said. Mr. Jenkins, let us know where you're watching in Texas. We would love to shout you out. He says, for Hootie, I'm so frustrated with our inability to recruit 4-star players in football. I was extremely disappointed, he said, that Wally Rayner's son decided to play at Minnesota. He also said, are you kidding me? He should have been playing here. He says, why is this program struggling at recruiting football?
That's a good question, and I wouldn't put a lot of stock into the star system thing, because I've seen some of the people who evaluate some of these high school players, and believe me, some of them should not be evaluating high school football talent, because they didn't play, they didn't coach. They're just, I don't know. I don't put much stock in it. I've seen guys who are 2 stars, 1 stars, and no stars end up in the NFL. I've seen guys with 5 stars even come here and can't do anything. So Jim Grobe and even the Dave Clawson at Wake Forest make a living on recruiting 2 stars and coaching them up. Frank Beamer was really good at that. If you see a kid who fits your system and you like him and he's got what you're looking for, if you can coach him up, they can overcome some of the other things that they might not have, and it's more about in here, I think, than some of the metrics we see all the time. There were some pretty good players that I know that Algro and George Wells brought in here who were 2 stars or below and played in the NFL. So I wouldn't put a lot of stock in that. It is, they aren't doing a good job recruiting, and they haven't for quite some time. And again, part of it is the academics. I remember Danny Wilmer told me that they would try to get some guys in, and they were really good football players, and sometimes academically they just couldn't get them in, and so they would send them to Marshall, and Marshall ended up having some really good football teams. Not saying that was the only reason why, but it certainly contributed to that. there were some guys that ended up in the NFL that Virginia just couldn't get into school, wouldn't be accepted, and this goes back for not centuries, but decades. I like to tell the story, and I've told it here probably multiple times, that Don Shula told me this was the hardest job he ever had, and he ended up being the NFL's winningest coach in history. That Virginia was his first job. It was his hardest job because of the academics. And I don't know. Tony Elliott is convinced, and Carla Williams is convinced, that you can have great academics and great football, but history hasn't shown us that.
Right.
I mean, you look at Northwestern, you look at Vanderbilt.
Maybe you point to a couple of years of football, maybe a short stretch with Stanford, that may justify that statement.
Yeah,
but the
Cal,
proof
and they're all struggling.
Right.
But
the proof of performance is limited.
But I think I think even Cal and Stanford have some things in their curriculums, some majors where athletes can better exist and earn a degree.
Kelsey says Notre Dame's doing it.
Notre Dame is doing it. They have the national reputation, and they get some of the top of the heap football players. I mean, who doesn't want to go to Notre Dame?
Right. They have a national televised contract. They got the NBC contract. They're Notre Dame. Good night.
Yeah.
It's not and I'm not trying to throw shade on her. I appreciate your comment. Appreciate you watching the program. Comparing UVA to Notre Dame is not a fair comparison.
Yeah, and I've been to Notre Dame a few. The first time I went to Notre Dame, I went with a radio guy and Doug Terring.
The St. Anne's Belfield retired athletic director?
He drove us out there, and a guy who had gone to Notre Dame, Vic Dorr from the Richmond paper, and we went out to interview Lou Holtz, and
but that was a fun trip.
we got to see all the great stuff at Notre Dame, all the historical stuff in terms of football and all that, and I can't remember. I guess it was Warren Swain, the old play-by-play announcer. He said, after this visit to Notre Dame, he said, I'm ready to commit and become a Catholic. And he said, that's what the kind of impression that short visit of 2 days to South Bend had on him. So I can imagine what it has on a 18-year-old kid with all that tradition. And Notre Dame's got it. I mean, they're one of the storied football programs in America. Even though they haven't won a national championship since 1988, but still, you're going to find them in the top 10 more often than not.
Well said. Kevin Higgins, hello. Jason Howard, hello. Carol Thorpe, hello. Bob Yarborough. Woody Fincham, welcome to the broadcast. Thank you for watching the show. Marcella, welcome to the broadcast. Thank you for watching the program. Viewers and listeners, if you have questions, put them in the feed. We'll relay them live on air. The fabulous Betsy Nugent watching the program. Love you, Betsy. We got to talk basketball. We're an hour in. We've been talking football. The viewers and listeners have helped shape the discussion. We love when you guys ask questions. I got one more from Chad Wood, who's a diehard orange and blue fan. He says a couple of things. There's too much to do in Charlottesville, unlike Blacksburg. Little zing from Chad to the Hokies. There's too much to do on a Saturday for folks in this area. They get distracted when it comes to other things, and that's why they're not showing up to football. That's not the case in Blacksburg. That's what he says. He also says this to you. He says that, to Hootie's point, you guys have counted on one hand the football programs that have done academics and football successfully. That doesn't speak to the potential of doing academics and football successfully, the fact you can rattle them off on one hand. That's another very good point. And he thinks that, and he says this, which I agree with. He discounts the star system, but what he really puts stock in is the offers that a recruit gets. If he's getting offers from big-time programs, that means a hell of a lot more than the star system. And Mr. Jenkins says, Hootie, I'm watching in San Antonio, where hopefully the Who's will be playing in the Final Four in 2025.
That would be fun. I've never been to. That's the only major city in Texas I've never been to. So I would love to experience that. But he made some valid points. not. I don't think many people who have the kind of academics that Virginia and Vanderbilt and Northwestern feature. Show me how it's done, because I haven't seen it. There's some good schools out there who win, but they've made adjustments. They've made concessions with their football teams. They don't feel like that providing a major or a curriculum in, say, sports management, or if you look at some of the more successful football programs around the country, they have a lot of options in terms of classes that athletes can take and thrive in. Hotel management, stuff like, there's a lot of stuff, not just sociology or anthropology or African American studies or whatever. There's some other stuff that they've introduced into their schools, and I don't think it tarnishes their diplomas. I really don't. And some schools, I won't name some of them, but I know for a fact that there's some academically famous football programs out there, schools out there who have helped their football program bring in some athletes who normally probably wouldn't be part of their student bodies.
I mean, we saw with North Carolina basketball and North Carolina football. Mm-hmm. They have people taking exams and writing their papers for them.
Yeah, I mean, and not, you can do it without going to that extreme, but I know for a fact, because I've talked to their head coaches, and they've told me that we're not like we used to be 25, 30 years ago. We've made some adjustments, and I don't know that Virginia will ever want to do that. They think it taints their diploma if they create a maybe something like a sports management program. I don't know, but I mean, there's some schools that help their athletes who might be borderline academically. They let them go to a nearby college and take some classes to build up their academic resumes, and that's gone on at a lot of places, some in the ACC. I don't know what the answer is. It's been an issue here as long as probably that there's been football here, and I don't know. I'm not in position to suggest that Virginia does this, but they have to be faced with the reality of. I just don't think if they continue to go in this direction and not make some kind of adjustments to make it easier on some of the athletes.
This is what we got.
This is just going to be a continuing problem. And I've talked to some of the former players, and they don't agree with that either, because they were good academic students, and they said, well, we don't believe that. We think we can still win anyway. But the world has changed a lot since the George Welsh era. I mean, college football has changed. It's more of a money game now. There's a lot of politics involved. You've got it's ever changing with the NIL and the transfer portal and things like that coaches probably felt like they would never have to deal with. Who knows what we might be dealing with 5 years from now. And I just don't know if they can continue to expect greater things from any football coach if they don't make some philosophical adjustments. And frankly, I don't see that happening.
Your prediction for Louisville? Not only your prediction, how about 5 keys to potential victory? And folks, we'll cut to the chase. The Hoos are a 20-point dog right here. And as Jerry Hootie Ratcliffe highlighted, they got a lot to play for, including a potential ACC championship matchup against Florida State. This is a nationally televised ball game in Louisville, and this fan base is full of excitement and full of passion right now because Louisville's contending for a potential crown here. Your thoughts against Louisville?
That's a rabid fan base.
Yep.
And one of the best in the ACC, really. It's their, there's no pro sports in Kentucky, and so Louisville is the largest city in Kentucky, and that's their pro team, and they treat it like a pro team. And I don't see a win there. Virginia's always struggled at Louisville, it seems. They don't seem to have a lot of weaknesses. The one loss that they did have was inexplicable, losing to Pitt. I still don't know how that happened. They lost 38-21 to Pitt, and I would have thought
Pitt's not very good.
If they'd have had a loss, I surely wouldn't have thought it would be against Pitt. They're undefeated at home. They have a good quarterback. They have good coordinators. They have great running backs. They have a solid defense. They've only given up 3 points in the last 2 games. They shut out Duke 23-0. They manhandled the Hokies last week 34-3. They have a really strong defense. It's very hard to run against. There's no, like Tony Elliott that we've mentioned earlier, when they take out that first unit, they bring in 4 more guys that are almost as good, if not as good. They got a good secondary. They can rush the quarterback with 4 people. They don't have to get exotic on you. And, Virginia struggled to run the ball last week against Georgia Tech. Well, they're going to be facing a defense with 6 people in the tackle box. They don't have to load it up like some teams have against Virginia with 7 or 8. They can get the job done with 6, and that puts you in a bind. It puts pressure on your quarterback. Again, probably a freshman quarterback who's not making the best decisions in the world under pressure. I think the only way Virginia would be able to win that game is if Louisville's just looking past them toward Miami or something down the road and just completely forgets that Virginia's coming to town, and Virginia plays its best game of the season, doesn't make mistakes, and but the odds of that happening are not very good.
Jerry Ratcliffe, guys, football, no doubt front and center with 3 games left. We got to step aside and talk basketball. We have questions coming in here in the basketball world with the victory against Tarleton State last night, an absolute blowout. Multiple people are already highlighting what we wanted to talk about, the surprise starting lineup. I think that's the biggest takeaway from last night. What you call it? Rent an opponent? What do you call it?
Rent a victim.
Rent a victim.
Yep.
80-50.
Yep.
It was 43-18 at one point. It was a shellacking, and that's an understatement. And it should have been. The takeaway, the biggest one I take away, was the starting lineup. Tony Bennett rolled out in game 1. I think it's also important to highlight what happens against Tarleton State from a starting lineup standpoint is not necessarily indicative of what the starting lineup will be going into conference play. So I want to caveat it with that. Your thoughts of this contest, Hootie?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Jacob Groves and Andrew Rohde and Blake Buchanan were all starters, along with Reese Beekman and Isaac McNeely. Well, actually, that's not right. I think I guess Ryan Dunn was one of the starters.
Yep.
But I think those guys had really worked hard in practice and impressed Tony in the scrimmages against UConn and Maryland. And I agree with you. I think that, and Tony told us this down in Charlotte. He says, I may not be the same Tony Bennett in terms of starting the same starting rotation every week after week, game after game, like he's been known to do over his 15 years here, that he may have different starting lineups for different teams, how they match up. And I wouldn't be surprised if they had a different starting lineup Friday night down in Charlotte against Florida. I think Blake Buchanan who's 6'10" freshman from Idaho, was kind of a surprise starter. I thought he might not, but I think that Jordan Minor, as big and physical as he is, I think he's a step slower too, and I think Tony really likes Blake Buchanan's mobility, and that's the way college basketball is trending, with more smaller, mobile guys who can handle the ball, who can
Stretch the floor.
It can stretch the floor on offense and can defend the other team stretching on defense. So I think he really likes that mobility and movement that Buchanan gives him. And Buchanan looked pretty good last night.
No doubt.
He had a nice block shot.
16 minutes for Buchanan, only 11 minutes for Minor. Two other takeaways from me. The starting lineup, a bit of a surprise, but I want to caveat, like I said, the starting lineup against Tarleton State is not indicative of the starting lineup come ACC play.
Right.
Second surprise for me was the limited usage of Jordan Minor. Only got 11 minutes. A lot of folks, this show, me, thought Minor was going to be the bruiser in the paint that Tony was going to rely on. And my third takeaway, man, Leon Bond is explosive.
He's fun to watch.
He is fun to watch, Leon Bond.
I'm going to be writing a column about him later today. And we heard great things about him last year when he redshirted, that he was really good in practice. And I'm sure there were times last year when the team was struggling and Tony was probably thinking,
I wish I had this guy.
Yeah, maybe I should take that red shirt
I
off.
know.
But he's fun. He's a fun kid. He's a lively guy. I mean, he's always wearing a grin. He's got a great attitude. And like you said, he's explosive. He can rebound. He can shoot it. Oh, that one-hand dunk off a rebound was the loudest roar of the night. Our photographer, Jonathan Golden, got a great picture of him doing that. He's going to be a player. I think at times we may see he and Dunn there in the front court together.
I hope so.
Which
God,
Leon was really all over it last night. He said that could be scary. You don't want to see us together out there on the floor in the front court. So he's delivered fair warning to future opponents. But the Groves and Rhodey were pretty solid. Groves got in a little foul trouble early, as did Ryan Dunn. But both of those guys
Rhodey struggled a bit with the jumper.
Yeah, but I think both of those guys can shoot it. And they proved it last year. Groves at Oklahoma, and Rhodey at St. Thomas in Minnesota. I think Groves is an intriguing guy, and he started out his season last year as one of the top guys in the Big 12 scoring, and even into the early end of the Big 12 schedule, he was still producing. Then he went into a 10-game slump for some reason, and I think he kind of shot his way out of it at the end. But I think he has a lot of potential with a 6'9" guy who can play and defend multiple positions and can shoot the three, can go inside. This should be a fun team, I think, to cover and to watch for fans because, again, he played 10 guys last night. I don't know that he'll continue to do that. He may during some of these games early season. Probably not when it comes to ACC games unless he feels like he needs to. But he can go with so many different kinds of lineups, big, small, not real big, but bigger, smaller, quicker. I think there'll be times he'll play 4 guards. And Reese Bigman was a horse last night. Exactly the guy that we expected him to be. I was walking out of the arena with Jason Williford after the game last night, and he said, He said, how'd you like Reese? Have you ever seen him that aggressive before? And I said, no, I haven't. And his stat line, I'll read it off to you real quick. 5 of 9 from the field. He didn't make a three-pointer, but he hit 6 or 7 free throws, had 4 rebounds, 16 points, 7 assists,
7 dimes,
no turnovers, 3 steals in 27 minutes.
I'll take it.
Even Billy Gillespie, the Tarleton coach, said he was in control of the game as long as he was in there, and he said, now that was a performance. He was very impressive, and Isaac McNeely, I think, showed us that he put in a lot of work during the off season.
Look bigger.
He's bigger, stronger, quicker. Has more to his game than just a three-pointer, which we'll see as we go along. But that three-pointer is a thing of beauty. He's not going to miss many of those.
McNeely's the guy, when he shoots, you're surprised it doesn't go in.
Yes.
Most of the time you're like, okay, is the shot going to go in? With McNeely, you're angry when it doesn't go in. That's how good he is. Florida Friday, neutral site, Charlotte. ACC Network, 7 o'clock tip. We'll close with that one. Virginia against the Gators.
It'll be interesting. Florida's sort of in the same boat that Virginia is, although they only went 16 and 17 last year and lost in the first round of the NIT. They had Todd Golden, their coach, had 9. He has 9 new players. He had a lot of guys exit the program after last season, so they're feeling their way. They had an easy win last night, another Rena victim for the Gators. They have bragged a little bit that they beat Jim Larinaga's Miami team in a secret scrimmage. It's not so secret by 2 points, but I don't know Coach Larinaga's view on scrimmages. I don't think he counts it as a win-loss like some of these guys do. It's more about exploring what your team is about and building chemistry and finding lineups that work together as opposed to just trying to win. Virginia has a little bit of revenge too. The last 2 times they played Florida was in the postseason, and Florida beat their brains out both times and brutally ended 2 Virginia seasons. One out in, I think, Denver, and then one down in Orlando a few years back. So I'm sure Tony Bennett hasn't forgotten those and would like to extract some kind of revenge on the Gators. Although he's not a big revenge guy, but you don't want to let a Gator hangover occur for sure.
Jerry Ratcliffe, guys, the publisher of JerryRatcliffe.com. Time flies when you're sitting across from a Virginia Sports Hall of Famer. 40-plus years on the beat. An hour and 20 minutes.
Wow.
Of having fun talking Virginia. What can we expect? Final question for you on JerryRatcliffe.com.
We'll be writing more about the opening game and previewing Florida. I'm going to write a column on Ryan Dunn. I had an interview with him last week and a little bit after the game last night, so I'll have a nice piece on him. We'll be doing the lead up to the Louisville game. We'll write a little bit about why Tony Bennett decided to redshirt 3 guys last night.
People are already making so much of that right now.
Yeah, I think it's probably too premature.
Premature
to do that, and just the general stuff. I think it'll be anything that Wahoos want to read about.
JerryRatcliffe.com. I'm on the website every day. JerryRatcliffe.com for anything Virginia related. Hootie, thank you. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thanks for being with me all these several weeks that we've done this, and it's a lot of fun.
It is a lot of fun. Thank you to the viewers and listeners. You made this program a piece of cake today. Judah Wickower, props to you. Thank you so much to Judah Wickower. The I Love CVille show is up at 12:30, ladies and gentlemen. Check out JerryRatcliffe.com for all your UVA sports content and analysis. So long, everybody. Take care. Excellent work. Excellent.
a lot of ground.